Hello everyone, to the Decabyte series. This is Decabyte number 6 on OBG emergencies part 2. So what's on the agenda today? We're going to talk about antepartum hemorrhage, hyperemesis gravidarum, preeclampsia and eclampsia, anti-D immunoglobulin, how and when to give, and emergency delivery, and finally wind up with postpartum hemorrhage. So let's talk about antepartum hemorrhage. Antepartum hemorrhage is by definition bleeding after 24 weeks of gestation. It could be due to any causes, but the most common cause or the dangerous cause is abruptio placenta. Normally, the placenta is going to separate after birth, but premature separation of placenta before this is called abruptio placenta. The blood is accumulated and sometimes it does not come out, which is called concealed hemorrhage, and sometimes it can leak out of the cervical os and contribute to vaginal bleeding. The other form is placenta previa, where the placenta deposits in the lower part of the uterus or just above the cervical os and act as a source of bleeding or APH. The next form is called vasa previa, where the fetal blood vessels grow in an abnormal fashion right above the internal os and cause excessive amount of vaginal bleeding or APH. Whatever is the type or cause of the antepartum hemorrhage, the investigations and management don't change. Now we have three important things which we need to take care of. 1, to control the bleeding, 2, to deliver the fetus in the safest way possible, and 3, to prevent complications. So firstly, we take up some blood to test for DIC profile, because disseminated intravascular coagulation is a big complication of abruptio placenta. We take up some blood and arrange for 6 units of blood because we might need to transfuse later, check the rhesus status of the patient, and then we perform or take a blood sample for the Kleihor test. A Kleihor test is a test which is looking for feto-maternal hemorrhage or mixing of fetal blood with maternal blood, the amount or the proportion. The fetal cells look bright red in color and the maternal cells look light pink in color. We call in the obstetrics department, and fluid resuscitation and blood transfusion is the mainstay of ED management. If the female is Rh negative, we administer the anti-D 300 micrograms intramuscular. And to deliver the fetus in the safest way possible, caesarean delivery is the route preferred because vaginal bleeding is occurring spontaneously. Now, what is hyperemesis gravidarum? It is the excessive amount of nausea and vomiting which is occurring during pregnancy or gravidarum. Now, the pathogenesis of hyperemesis gravidarum is not clear, but increased amount of beta HCG has been proposed. Now, a milder form of hyperemesis gravidarum is called as morning sickness. Now, when we have excess amount of nausea and vomiting, what is happening? We are losing water, the female is losing water, and the female is losing HCl. Because of loss of water, she is at risk for hyponatremia, and because of loss of H plus and Cl, she is at risk for hypochloremic metabolic alkalosis. There is also risk of hypokalemia, so electrolyte abnormalities are at bay. We need to do an ultrasound scan because there is a possibility that increased amount of beta HCG could be because of a hydatidiform mole, and this appearance is called as a snowstorm appearance, which is characteristic of hydatidiform mole. Also, you can have twins which are seen on an ultrasound scan, which can contribute to increased amount of beta HCG. Then we resuscitate the patient with IV fluids, and we need to give the patient thiamine because out of all the vitamins which the female loses, thiamine is the one which predisposes the patient to a big complication called Wernicke's encephalopathy, which is also the same one seen in alcoholics with thiamine deficiency, where the patient has confusion of thalmoplegia, ataxia, etc. And finally, no antiemetics are considered or routinely used, but if you have to choose one, you choose promethazine and cyclizine, which are basically antihistamines for the vomiting. One more big complication is because of excessive amount of vomiting, you have retching at the gastroesophageal junction or a tear that is called Mallory-Weiss syndrome or a Mallory-Weiss tear. Finally, we need to provide the patient with DVT prophylaxis in the form of thromboembolic deterrent stockings or anticoagulation medications such as heparin. Now let's talk about preeclampsia and eclampsia. Preeclampsia by definition is a triad of features comprising of proteinuria greater than 0.3 grams per 24 hours, rising blood pressure greater than 140/90, and a gross edematous state. You can remember this by this triad pre for preeclampsia. If convulsions come into play, then the name changes to eclampsia. And remember that this has to be after 20 weeks of gestation to fit into the definition. Now, what is the pathogenesis of preeclampsia? Though it is idiopathic or unclear, there are various theories in the air. The first one says that an autoantibody called angiotensin 1 autoantibody, as the name itself says, this antibody stimulates the angiotensin 1 receptors and causes increased amount of vasoconstriction, and that causes placental ischemia and placental dysfunction. Or some say that natural killer cells destroy the placenta, others say that there is excess amount of oxidative stress causing placental dysfunction, and some say that there is a genetic factors involved. Whatever is the cause, the placental which is not functioning properly will cause growth restriction, and this ill-developed placenta are going to release some factors such as SFLT1, which is going to cause decreased growth of blood vessels, and 2, they are going to cause endothelial dysfunction or endothelial damage or endothelial changes. These endothelial changes cause swelling of endothelium up inside and therefore cause vasoconstriction, which is nothing but hypertension. Increased blood pressure damages the basement membrane of the glomerulus and causes proteinuria, and when you have leakage of proteins into the urine, your oncotic pressure falls down and therefore you have seepage of fluid into the interstitial spaces. If it occurs in the brain, it leads to cerebral edema. or vasoconstriction of the blood vessels going to the liver cause liver dysfunction. If you have liver dysfunction, the patient is going to have right upper quadrant pain. If the patient has cerebral edema, patient is going to have headache, papilledema, occipital lobe blindness, or convulsions, or any one or combination of the above. That is the pathogenesis of preeclampsia. Once we know that, let's see how we manage it. First in, we notify the obstetrics department, put the patient in left lateral position to prevent aspiration, and then we have two drugs which we can use. One is IV labetalol and the other one is IV hydralazine, provided the BP is not 170 over 110. IV labetalol 20 mg IV bolus, and you can repeat that up to a maximum of 300 mg. If you are using IV hydralazine, 5 mg initially, and you can repeat that 5 to 10 mg every 10 minutes. Now you need to be careful with fluids, because you are already putting the patient is already at risk of edema, then there is an increased risk of pulmonary edema if you push in more fluids. So the fluid should be at a rate of 1 ml per kg per hour. Finally, if the BP is 170 over 110 or the proteinuria is greater than 1 gram per 24 hours, then we call it severe preeclampsia. If you have a patient with severe preeclampsia or with fits or eclampsia, then the drug of choice becomes magnesium sulfate, where 4 grams IV is given over 10 minutes, and then you provide a maintenance infusion of 1 gram per hour for 24 hours. Of course, you need to monitor for magnesium toxicity by checking the deep tendon reflexes. That's about the management of preeclampsia and eclampsia. Finally, the definitive management is delivery, but it is associated with complications, of course. Now let's come to anti-D immunoglobulin. Before we talk about how much anti-D immunoglobulin and when to give anti-immunoglobulin, let's see how and why we need anti-D immunoglobulin. If the father is Rh positive and the mother is Rh negative, and we have an Rh positive fetus, during the delivery, the Rh positive fetal cells mix up with the Rh negative mother and lead to the development of antibodies inside the mother, or sensitize the mother for development of antibodies. The first pregnancy and the first fetus escape the attack of these antibodies, but during subsequent delivery or subsequent pregnancy, these antibodies will cross the placenta and attack the Rh positive fetal cell, because these antibodies are IgG antibodies which can cross the placenta. They will destroy the fetal red blood cells and cause hemolytic disorder of newborn or hemolysis. Now, there are a set of guidelines called Green Top guidelines. These Green Top guidelines are the set of criteria during which we need to give the anti-D immunoglobulin. These are closed abdominal injury, antepartum hemorrhage, an ectopic pregnancy which is at risk of rupture, spontaneous and threatened miscarriages which are greater than 12 weeks, and intrauterine death. Any of these conditions and all of these conditions put the mother at risk for mixing of maternal blood with fetal blood. So these are the constituents of Green Top guidelines. Now let's see what is the amount of anti-D we need to give. For routine antenatal prophylaxis with an Rh negative mother and an Rh positive fetus, you need to give 500 international units intramuscular at 28 weeks first and 34 weeks. Following a sensitizing episode, that is any one of the Green Top guidelines, and following delivery, you need to give the anti-D as soon as possible, but definitively within 72 hours. 500 international units intramuscular is the dose to be given. Now, how do we do an emergency delivery? This is a field of apprehension for me, because I have done my OBG rotations in the weakest way possible. So to do an emergency delivery, what we need to know is the most common way of presentation is an occipito anterior position or a left occipito anterior position, with the occiput faces anteriorly. You need to after taking the sterile precautions, you need to use both your hands, where in one hand you will use a sterile towel or a drape which is placed inferiorly, and with the other hand you are going to provide slight amount of counter pressure. This slight amount of counter pressure will allow the easy expulsion of the fetus. Then you check for the presence of nuchal cord around the neck of the fetus. If there is any, you spontaneously reduce that nuchal cord inside and continue with the delivery of the fetus. Once the head is outside and the neck is outside, then a slight amount of downward traction is going to cause delivery of the anterior shoulder. Once we have delivered the anterior shoulder, we have to apply a little bit of traction in the upward direction so that we deliver the posterior shoulder. Once the baby, then we put the hand under the axilla and remove the remaining body of the fetus. Once we have removed it, we put it in double clamp the umbilical cord and cut it with the help of a scissors, and we dry the baby with a sterile drape towel, and then put the baby in an incubator where we check the Apgar score at 1 minute and 5 minutes. That's how we do an emergency delivery in the simplest way possible. Final topic for today is postpartum hemorrhage. Now, postpartum hemorrhage is of two types: primary postpartum hemorrhage, where the blood loss is greater than 500 ml within 24 hours after delivery, and secondary postpartum hemorrhage, where you are going to have bleeding after the first day up to 12 weeks after delivery. The amount of blood loss in secondary postpartum hemorrhage is less when compared to primary postpartum hemorrhage. Therefore, secondary postpartum hemorrhage is less lethal when compared to primary postpartum hemorrhage. Now, uterine atony is the most common cause of primary postpartum hemorrhage. The meaning of uterine atony is that the uterus is not going to contract back to the normal size, and therefore you have higher risk of bleeding from the vagina, causing primary postpartum hemorrhage. Whereas retained products of conception are the most common cause of secondary postpartum hemorrhage. They might have to be removed manually or with the help of surgical instruments. How do we manage? Primary postpartum hemorrhage, fluid resuscitation is the mainstay, and since the blood loss is very high, you need to cross match at least 4 units of blood. If there is no time, you can use O negative blood for transfusion, and then you need to compress the uterus or contract the uterus, since uterine atony is the most common cause of primary postpartum hemorrhage. That you can do with your own hands, that is by manual compression. Just contract the uterus so that the blood loss is less, or you can use with the help of drugs such as oxytocin, which are uterine stimulants. You take 20 units of oxytocin, mix it in a liter of NS and run it at 200 ml per hour. There are other uterine stimulants also apart from oxytocin. You have ergometrin and prostaglandin, but this has more side effects, and prostaglandin is less efficacious when compared to oxytocin. Secondary postpartum hemorrhage, you need to fluid resuscitate the female because no need for blood because you don't have massive blood loss there. You need to give IV ampicillin to cover the gram positive and gram negatives, and metronidazole to cover the anaerobic organisms. And finally, call in the obstetrics team. I hope this Decabite has helped you in a way to manage the obstetric patients. I thank you for your time, and I promise I will see you next time with my next Decabite. Till then, take care.